Hello, let me welcome you on our second panel of Green Transformation Festival by RECET. I'm Agata Zysiak, I'm a researcher at RECET, and I think this is going to be an exciting panel. Very happy to have all our guests here. It took a while to gather this crowd of specialists and experts on urban transformation, cities, and climate crisis. So let's start with introducing our panelists today. And on my right, we have Sanz, a councillor in Barcelona for Barcelona in Comú, a municipal group, and vice president of climate action and strategic planning for the metropolitan area of Barcelona. She also worked as deputy mayor of ecology, urbanism, infrastructure and mobility, which is a very long title, in Barcelona City Council, from where she promoted green and sustainable transformation and solutions you might have read in press, like superblocks or low emission zones. Further, we have Yvonne Franz, who's a senior lecturer and postdoc researcher at the University of Vienna, so my colleague from university. And she's the scientific director of postgraduate program Cooperative Urban and Regional Development. And she's working mainly on urban revitalization, gentrification, caring communities. And her current project is actually a comparative one, examining Vienna, Berlin, Bologna, and Ljubljana. Further on the right, which is not the direction we want to go. It's Michał Czepkiewicz, a geographer working at the University of Warsaw at EUROREC, and also at the Faculty of Sociology of Adam Mickiewicz University, which is in Poznań. And he deals with relationships between urban planning, mobility, greenhouse gas emission, and well-being of urban residents. And he also cooperates with local government in Poland, so we have connection between researchers and, let's say, administration, local governments. As further on the right, we have Nina Abrahamczik, a member of Viennese City Council and the Provincial Parliament, and she's a chair of Committee of Climate, Environment, Democracy and Personnel, specializing in social participation. So as you see, we managed to gather specialists both from academic background and more politics and putting solutions in the action. And when we're organizing and thinking about this festival, one of the certain things that we need to focus on the cities, not only because demographic reasons, as majority of Europeans and global population lives in the cities, but as well because they are most vulnerable and important places when solution can be raised, solved, and negotiated. And also thinking of what we want to talk today, let's start with talking about main challenges that European cities are facing, because we want to today focus mainly on European cities with problems of Global South and so different, let's say, conditions today's cities facing. I think this is more reasonable. So based on your expertise, research and experience, what are main challenges faced by the city you're working on? And Nina, could you please start?
Thank you very much. It's always kind of hard to start, and there is so much we could talk about right now because there are many, many challenges that most cities in Europe share. But I'm going to focus on Vienna, of course, because it's the city I know most about, so I hope that's okay. Well, one of the biggest challenges is that we're a growing city, a very fast-growing city, even faster than we expected. So we reached 2 million people living in Vienna now, a few years earlier than we actually expected it, and we're still growing. All those people, of course, need infrastructure. They need, we need schools, we need flats, we need to expand mobility and a whole lot of other things, while also facing climate crisis. And when I speak about climate crisis, as cities, it's very important that we of course, protect the climate and take a lot of measures regarding this aspect. But on the other side, we already face climate crisis now. It's not something in the future. We already have heat waves. Right now, there's a lot of flooding in Germany and already in Austria as well. I saw pictures today from Linz, the capital of Upper Austria, and they really have troubles at the moment because there's so much water. We usually tend to think about heat when we think about climate crisis, but there's also other aspects. I mean, in Cyprus at the moment, there's a drought. They really have problems regarding water supply, and here is too much at the moment. So we face similar challenges at different times, and What we as a city also must do apart from protecting climate is to adapt to the new climate, which means a lot of measures, and there can never be enough, and it can never be fast enough. So we have a lot to do regarding the transformation of the whole city, actually. It's like we don't want to use gas anymore for heating in our apartments. But that's something you can't do from until tomorrow, because it takes many people who do it. So that's one of the challenges. We don't have the people who have the knowledge to do it right now. We can't do it all at the same moment, and that's something that's sometimes hard to understand, because people, of course, want to have trees, for example, in the street they live in. And I can understand that, but if we know that in like 5 years we're going to do new district heating in the street they live in, we are not going to plant the trees now, because we would have to take them away again. So sometimes we have to think in the future, they're not too far future, and to explain to people why the whole city is going to change and why it has to change. And transformation is always kind of scary. I do understand that, especially if you know that there are measures where people will have to come into your apartment and they're going to work there, and it's never fun because it's loud and it's messy, but it's necessary. And the big question as a city is always, how can we make it in a way that people, first of all, understand why it's necessary, and to make it as easy for them as possible. Because if we want people to live climate friendly, but as a city administration and as a politician, of course, we have to make it possible for them. If you don't have the infrastructure, then of course it's hard. That's why I'm such a big fan to live in Vienna, because public transport is really great in the city. I mean, 365 euros a year to use all of public transport in the city is something that's a decision of the city itself, because the costs are way more. We have like more than 200 million a year that the city invests in public transport, because 365 euros a person is never enough to finance the whole public transport in Vienna, which is not something where we say, okay, it's great now, we need even more of it, because we want people to move differently. And I'm glad that we move differently, that mobility is totally different in Vienna than in the rest of Austria, and that's something that cities really have high chances in to face these questions, because it's way harder if you go in other provinces in Austria. I mean, just for example, my aunt lives near a city in Lower Austria, and there is a bus. The stop is right next to the house she lives in, but it only comes 3 times a day. So how is she supposed to lead a climate-friendly life regarding mobility if there is no public transport, for example? So that's our job as politicians and also for the city administration to make this infrastructure. For example, we also know that we are going to need a lot more of water, and I love Viennese water. I'm happy that we have it here to drink. But every month when the committee I'm chair of, the Committee for Climate, Environment, Democracy and Personnel is in session, we spend many, many millions to ensure our water supply in Vienna, because there are more people and the people also need more water, every single person. If we look into the future, so there's our own water strategy for until 2050, for example. If we look at the heat, that's one of the biggest challenges for city everywhere, because we have a lot of urban heat islands. We have our own plan where we know where in Vienna there are heat islands, and we know that it's hardest for vulnerable groups, of course. And that's, for example, these are older people, these are the very young people, the people with chronic illnesses, homeless people, and people with hard working conditions. Most people just think about the typical construction worker, but I also think about nurses, for example, and it's an aspect I wanted to also talk about now, that all the groups I just talked about, all the vulnerable groups, who usually cares for them? It's the women, of course. So care work in times of climate crisis is also an aspect I think we do not speak enough about. That's something I think we should. And just one last aspect, if I may. Something that connects many cities that we share, not only in Austria but in other countries as well, is that we have more and more people who do not have voting rights. And this is a problem because people are part of society, but we do not give them the same rights. And Austria is, well, especially difficult because we really have very strict citizen laws and it's hard to get citizenship. But I think that's something we have to change because all this transformation will only work if we involve people, if they have the possibility to talk with other people, to have their vote, to say what they need and to be a real part of the society because we can just face the climate crisis together. That's important. And last, I just want to say that all the challenges we face, and I just had the chance now to show the light on a few of them, I think it's not easy for cities, but I'm sure that cities are the answer in times of climate crisis.
Yeah, I was listening to you, wondering what should I start with, and I'm thinking of two kinds of problems that are connected. One is more social, related to housing affordability, which is in contrast with Vienna and its history. Now it seems that in biggest cities in Poland we have a period of like accumulation, in a sense of rising cost of renting and rising cost of buying apartments, houses, and about half of the transactions being for investment and for renting, not for own needs. And the smaller and smaller group of the society can afford to buy a property. And in Poland, it is like the culture and like the sort of housing market is so that people very much prefer to own, because renting is unsafe and is expensive, is volatile, prices are rising, and there is tenant protection, but it is not so. It's not always possible. There are different ways of different kinds of agreements that allow the landlord to evict. So I think this is something that we are tackling now and we will be tackling in the future. So this is more about like social affordability, social conditions of life. And when it comes to climate change, I think the biggest challenge now are different kinds of dependency on fossil fuels and energy, and also dependence on growth, which is more complicated. And in terms of fossil fuels and energy, I think two main aspects are household energy, especially heating. And in Poland, we have this quite high rate of energy poverty, which is related to often poor insulation or kind of mismatch of the size of the dwelling to the need of the person. So for instance, in the small towns, villages, we have older person living alone in like 150 meters in an old house, which is not insulated in modern technology, and they cannot afford to heat the dwelling. So it is in the winter it's really difficult, and many people just don't heat. They just don't use any heating. And this is connected to cities because it's about the population in the countryside, of people, younger people moving to cities and so on. And in the biggest cities also we have the problem of related problem of energy poverty related to heating, also related to poor insulation, and often it is in public housing. So this is a challenge and should be a task for local governments to improve the condition. But also in private dwellings, but there is not much Well, maybe there is funding, but it always requires like own contribution, and very many people cannot afford it or don't want to pay. So it is dependence on coal, but also on high electricity use. Sometimes the poorest people use the most energy. Normally, the wealthiest people use most energy, but sometimes the poorest use a lot because it just dissipates through the building. And another kind of dependency is on mobility. So suburbs and suburbanization is one example of being dependent on a car when you cannot reach your work or basic services without driving. In Poland, we don't have that bad situation as in the US or some other countries in the world, because we have inherited very good public transportation systems, which in cities survived privatization, because in the countryside they did not survive in most cases. So transport poverty is highest in the countryside, in small towns, and so on. But in cities also you have transport poverty, and often it is a transport poverty of forced car ownership. So people have the means to travel, but they spend a lot of money on that, and they cannot really move around in different way. It is also related to how the residences and the workplaces are located. So in the socialist period, it was simpler because people from one place were working in some factory, they took a train and so on and so forth. And now it's all spread around in different towns, and people from the center commute to the suburbs and so on. And there is also a new growing dependency, which is dependence on air travel, which is rarely probably thought about in this way. This is a topic that I'm now starting to study, and it is mostly related to migrants and to people who are relatively wealthy and they buy property abroad, or they are very well connected internationally and have friends or even partners living in another country or different continent. And I'm not saying that this is like a big challenge or a problem for cities right now, but this is a process that is going, that is fueling the growth in air travel. Of course, tourism and flying for holidays is the biggest source of emissions, but this is something that is probably easier to disentangle, like to kind of go back and use some alternatives, even though people get, this traveling gets habitual and people increasingly cannot imagine different way of traveling. And I'm talking about it as something that will be very important for emissions in the future and is already important. In our study in Poznań agglomeration and the three-city agglomeration, we found that emissions from flying are about like 30 to 35% of emissions from mobility. So it's almost as much as daily travel by car. In Iceland and Finland, where I did my previous research, it was about a half of emissions from mobility. And this is an activity that is very unevenly distributed in the society. And I'm not talking about it in a way that this is like unjust. More like, in a way it is, but it's more like that very few people generate very much of emissions. So it's about like 10% of people generate about a half of emissions, 20% generates more than 70. Interestingly, it also is like that in car travel. And also car travel is, like flying, is connected with wealth and education in Poland, at least, which might be surprising to hear. It is partly related to age. Older people in Poland usually have fewer percentage of them have high education. And they still live, they live in the city centers, so it's like a peculiar situation in which in city centers you have a higher percentage of older people and they use public transportation and walk almost everywhere, so their emissions are low. And we also asked in our study people whether they are satisfied with, whether their transportation needs are satisfied, and we found that people can be satisfied with their transport needs at both very low and very high emissions, and they can be dissatisfied at very low and very high emissions. So if someone is driving a lot from far suburb, they are using a lot of energy and they are unhappy. Which is interesting when we think about climate change and the increasing use of energy. Do we need to use more energy, ever-growing energy consumption, which relates to the previous talk about mining for minerals, even if it is electric energy. Maybe I will stop now, and we will come back to other things later.
Yeah, thank you. I can only add to most of the aspects you were mentioning, but as I'm a geographer, I take the privilege to go one step back, and by saying that there is not the only city or the one city we are talking about, which also means that we first have also to acknowledge the diversity of challenges that are apparent in our cities, because Vienna is completely different to Warsaw, but also a smaller city like Koper in Slovenia facing climate crisis through increase of water levels at the harbor has significant different challenges. But what we are all into is the climate crisis, and we all have to face it, and we all have to try our best to find solutions. And I think especially cities are perfect to look at in terms of experimental approaches, what to improve in terms of climate adaptivity or adaptation, but they are also good learning cases what can go wrong. And also in Vienna, not everything goes well. We speak about a housing crisis, and Vienna is the picture-perfect example how to deal or how to prevent a housing crisis through a really, really robust and important stock of social housing, but still affordability issues are on the table, and the answer to build new and to build more is contradicting everything what we know about biodiversity and loss of land. And my students that are today in the audience, we deal with alternative food production in cities, which is one of the most important empowerment tools to look at in order to have participation, in order to reach out to different social groups. But what to do if land becomes more and more limited, privatized, or even not privatized, but used for higher goals like housing or mobility. So this is, I think, the contested fields we are looking at, which is super interesting to look at the interdependencies. And what you also just mentioned, Nina, and you with all the let's say, effects from climate crisis, from flooding to wildfires, etc. I mean, we also need to start thinking in relations that we are connected to each other, the periphery, to the cities, and that we cannot find solutions either or, but it's a question on how to connect both. And I think that is one of my main arguments I would like to defend today, is that it's not going without cooperation. I think cooperation is key. Beyond silos, that's what we use the term when we speak about that, for instance, administration, that group number A is not talking to group number B, but there should be a communication. But also that university science is not yet good enough to really speak to the public, and reach out to public and explain what they do and what they know from research. So this cooperation beyond silos, coming together, sharing knowledge, but also sharing the joint fear, but also the knowledge that we have is crucial. And we do this currently in an ongoing, you just mentioned before, international project by looking particularly on vulnerable groups. Because I can only second, one of the major crises we have is a loss in democracy and a loss in participation. And especially marginalized groups are even at higher risk to become excluded from participation. And in our project, we look at deliberative participation tools from refugees to homeless people, but even female-headed households that are at a certain risk in the context of climate crisis. So I think there is already a lot of knowledge out there. We already know how to speak to each other, also how to share interdisciplinary knowledge, but we now actually need higher levels of action. And I'm sometimes a bit pessimistic because we really need an open and honest discussion also about post-growth strategies. So I think we also need to ask, can we go on with the current system? You call it capitalist system or neoliberal system, doesn't matter, I think. But is it really, can we just continue with what we have and renovating a little bit here and making mobility a little bit more sustainable there? I'm doubting that.
Okay. It's a big challenge, huh? Yeah, I have the super blocks. Yes, no. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I want to say that thank you for the invitation, because it's a pleasure for me to be here and can explain our policies in Barcelona, how we can transform Barcelona to fight against climate crisis, because this is, I think so, that is the most important challenge that the cities we have, And I think so that climate crisis poses two great challenges, inside, and I think so. It's related with the last intervention. And first is ensuring good health for all, and I think so. This is very important. And second, defining a new economic model that focuses on life, not market, not capital. I think. Yeah, we try to implement. And first of all, I think the following idea is important, because when we think about how to make cities livable places in the present and in the future, we have to consider what we can do to reduce the effects of heat, what we can do to take advantage of every drop of water, what we can do to generate clean energy, what we can do to ensure that no one is left without access to these basic commodities. I think so. This is very important. And if we understand that the public space is a natural extension of our homes, because it is where we relate, because it is where we learn to ride a bicycle when we are children, where it is where we feel accompanied when we are old. We must urgently improve our public space with these actions to achieve everything that I said before, about water, heat, and energy. And of course, we can do to guarantee the right to housing, affordable housing for everyone, not only social housing, because I think so this difference is important. Secondly, little is said about the need to consider a different production model. The climate crisis needs to change the way we produce and the way we consume. And at the same time, we need to guarantee that people have better jobs, not precarious ones, like now. And therefore, better living conditions. I think so. This is very important. And in this sense, I wonder is Europe in crisis? Because there is a lot of talk about the Green New Deal, But in practice, we have our cities dedicated to being Europe's tourist showcase. This is our productive model in many cities in Europe, no? And I think so. The important question in this sense is what productive model does Europe need to fight against the climate change, no? And we have seen, for example, in Barcelona, how thousands of tourist apartments were opened in our neighborhoods. How digital platforms like Airbnb exploit them without control and without taxing these homes, for example. Or how the centers are filled with hotels or souvenir shops, generating gentrification processes that drive us out of our neighborhoods. No? And there is no European regulation that prohibits it because these activities represent 20 or 30 or 40% of our GDP. No? And I think so that we need to rethink the economy and put an end to those extractive activities of natural resources and common goods that will make our cities inhabitable. No? Because we need, I think, we need regrowth. Regrowth means, I think so, the growth in some extractive activities and growth in some sustainable activities. No? And for all of this, in Barcelona, we tried to do different projects, no? In the last 8 years. But I think so the most important was that we have been defending urban planning that must be put at the service of living and rebuild the city. No? I think this is an important idea. And I defend that urban planning can change many things, but above all, you can change the rules and democratize them. No? I think so. That urban planning is an excellent political instrument. No? Usually, people say, no, urban planning is a neutral technique. No, because urban planning can generate losers or winners. No? And if you do a design, depending how you design the streets, the cars win, or people like children or elderly people win. No? And what have we done with urban planning in Barcelona? Some ideas, I want to share some ideas with you. No? First of all, we have doubled the public stock of housing. No? When we arrived in 2015 at the mayor office, there was more legal tourist apartments than public ones. 9,000 tourist apartments, 6,000 public homes. Now we have 12,000 public homes, but this is a different prioritization in the city. We have gained 1 million square meters of asphalt that are now for the people, for walking, for children to play. Also, we have created 1 more million meters of urban green areas. That's the equivalent to 92 soccer fields of new green areas. We have reduced the temperature by 7 degrees in all the green streets that we have built. Inequality is reduced by 3%. We have reduced air pollution by 30%. We have tripled the kilometers of bike lanes. We have promoted a metropolitan tram project to connect 9 municipalities of the metropolitan area. And how have we changed this? No? With 2 important programs, and both respond to the same strategy, urban regeneration in whole city to adapt Barcelona to the 21st century. No? If I have a few minutes, yeah. And to do this, we need to transform houses and streets, no? Because in our commitment, it's that right to health and right to housing are 2 inseparable rights. And concretely, to adapt houses of jumble neighborhoods, to have better insulated houses with green energy and basic commodities, no? Like lifts or balconies, because there are some neighborhoods that don't have these elements, basic elements. to duplicate public housing, to promote new forms of constructions to speed up times, or to promote housing cooperative on public land. And in terms of housing, all the work in cities like Vienna has inspired us a lot, no? And I think it's very important to say. And secondly, to adapt the streets, we developed the Superblocks program, no? And we understand, how I said, our public space like an extension of our houses. Public space is home, no? It must be understood as home, as a common for everyone. And historically, our public space was designed for cars, and not enough has been invested in public transport. And the consequence is 1 million cars entering and leaving every day in Barcelona, every day from the metropolitan area. 350,000 cars cross the city center every day, no? This is a lot, and the consequence of all this is that we exceed all pollution levels, no? And we have more than 1,000 premature deaths per year due to pollution, 7,000 accidents per year, children with cognitive problems, and 80% of our streets are occupied by cars, no? And I think so. This is that we need to change. And the Superblocks program, it's the biggest strategy to regenerate, aims to return the streets to main purpose, no? For people to enjoy them. And this new urban model transforms Barcelona to have 1 out of 3 streets made into a green streets for pedestrians and bicycles, and for the other 2 out of 3 streets are for sustainable mobility, especially for buses, and for more space of greenery and pedestrians and other things. Also, I think it's important, this strategy, for us because give special attention for the historical silence groups such as women, kids, elderly people, or disabled people, no? To do particular participatory processes, no? with these groups, like exploratory walks, and the result, I think so, it's amazing.
Thank you all. Now we have a whole panorama of problems and challenges cities facing, and I think one of the important, let's say, assumptions for our festival is to search for hope and solutions. And Janet, Dina, I think you addressed already a few, but can we make this round and try to find good practices, also critically with challenges implementing them, but focus maybe a little bit on this brighter side of how cities can face climate crisis. And a disclaimer, by no means we want to individualize the guilt of climate crisis on cities on this urban level. This is, of course, a global problem. Macro level solutions are needed on the level of dealing with global corporations, fossil fuels, and governments. But still, for now, our scale is urban scale, and how we can maintain some agency here. And maybe now, Janet, you were talking a lot about solution. I give you a break. And Yvonne, could you take over, focusing on good practices?
Sure. Maybe I start by explaining what you can do in order to find the solutions. You can look for innovative approaches, and when we take your argument into consideration, we could look at social innovative projects, so that do not have a capitalistic logic or market-based logic, but more a social, or I really like that you base it on health. So the aim is growth of health and not growth of economic income. Yeah. And we use that in our research as well, that we take the approach of social innovation in order to find solutions that are really empowering marginalized group. So the idea is not only to look for something new that is brilliant and brings people together, but really asking one step in addition to ask, does this change the power relations? So is a formerly marginalized group through this innovation in a higher power position? And this is a very fruitful approach in order to find the small gems, because the biggest challenge of social innovative activities is the scalability, to make it work everywhere. Yeah. So in a way, it's helpful to find solutions. And in our previous research, for instance, we looked in Berlin into a consultancy activity that supports female refugees in their ambitions to become self-employed. So not the Austrian approach to make people work in the labor market, in the formal labor market, but to really help them to become self-employed, selbstständig. And this really works well in Berlin because there's a huge lack of IT programmers and coders. So basically, you're running your one-person business, and in a very high reputation business field where you have good salaries, and altogether, this brings you in a way better position than more the welfare state approach that we conduct a lot in Austria to make people good working force in the formal labor market. So this is to give one example. The other one I'd like to mention is in Italy. They have a lot of socially innovative activities, as they usually maybe my colleagues would now say that's a bit too simple, but they don't trust too much into, let's say, the public policies. They do it on their own. So there's a high level of civic engagement. And what we could see and analyze in Parma is a program called Social Caretakers, where the municipality provided a building that got renovated for asylum seekers. And in return, asylum seekers supported the neighborhood with all kinds of activities. And so there was this clear idea to connect not only people in the building amongst each other, but also to reach out to the neighborhood. And also Italian cities are facing demographic change, so they become usually older and not younger. So there is a great need to connect, let's say, the host society with the newcomers. And this is on a small scale really working well. And I'm coming back to the challenge, how to scale up, how to make this work everywhere. And this brings me to my third and last example. In Vienna, we looked together with our colleagues from Caritas Wien at their social business Marktagskantin, so let's say the restaurant business where refugees but also asylum seekers become vocational training in all jobs related to gastronomy and hotel business. And by receiving this training, they become high-skilled and well-skilled future labor work in Austria. And this idea, I would say, or this practice has quite good potential to become scaled up. So already in other cities in Austria, we will find Markteskantins. But again, it's based on as you just argued, on this clear commitment that's not about economic growth, but based on social standards. So I would say there is no reason to lose hope. There is a lot of good stuff going on, but we need to shift our perception and to look at these smaller interventions and to really think about how to support those interventions in order to really make a change in power balances.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be in the same panel with someone from Barcelona and Comú, because for me this is like an inspiring good practice, a movement that I think recognizes the problems very well. I tried to think about examples from Poland, and there are many groups and actions that inspire me, but I also have a kind of critical view on them. They include cycling associations that have been very effective in improving cycling conditions in Polish cities, and they worked really persistently and professionally, also sometimes joining local governments and preparing legislation and standards and so on. Also just planting ideas in people's heads and so on, promoting. Another example is there are very many urban movements in Poland which have been collaborating for more than 15 years in the national level. Like more than 200 organizations are joined in a network and so on, and they have been also quite successful in like changing the way we talk about cities and the challenges that we have. They put very many topics on the agenda. They also joined some local councils and so on. So maybe not spectacularly successful or like, having power to really change things very much, but changing urban politics very much. And another example is one at the, it's a local kind of government level. It's Association of Municipalities in Upper Silesian region, which is the only association of municipalities that has a legal grounding that is actually a public authority. And they, at least in the mobility topics, they I think work pretty well. I very much admire their approach to science and research. They collaborate with sociologists, which is not obvious in mobility, because it's often understood as an engineering problem, incorrectly, of course. Geographers and other people, and they also implement quite progressive and I would say, I could even say eco-social ideas like degrowth economics, like to at the same time on an equal standing think about social justice and ecological aspects. And these are very good examples, and these groups are working very well towards their goals. But I think what is missing, especially in the urban movements, is the lack of maybe not understanding, but a lack of realization that is practical, that would be practical, that it is not an apolitical problem, because this is like a mantra in these urban movements. They are saying we are neither left, neither right. The whole repairing a hole in the street is not left, it's not right. Not everyone, but there are many. It is like coming back and coming back. But I think cities are against powerful interests. They are against the tendencies of capital to exploit what is valuable in the cities, like public services and labor and space and land and so on. Public housing that is privatized and then accumulated, and also the economic system that that really works very well in these conditions. Like our economic system is dependent on growth, and it requires growth for stability. So I think the challenge is much bigger. The challenges that cities face are much bigger than what the urban movements in Poland, at least, would say. And I think it's more productive to have a good diagnosis first, because then you can really think of the solutions. And I think that partly the solutions lie in cities, like Barcelona is showing, I think, at least to some extent, in tourism and fighting these over-tourism. But in terms of fighting climate change and the system that is incompatible with long-term sustainability, I think cities don't have enough power. They don't have, at least in Poland, in some countries might be better, but they don't have fiscal power, no monetary power, and also we are very, very far from control over production. And if we don't control production, we are not going to control consumption. We can control consumption of, driving in a way, but we are not going to reduce the number of produced cars just by, parking restrictions. So I think in this regard, we need a much more powerful movement. But I know it's necessary, and I know we also don't yet have models for a degrowth economy and degrowth city. We have a lot of ideas, but we don't yet have a very clear, workable idea that would suit very many places. I think we probably will never have any one like blueprint for degrowth economy in cities, but we need to work on them in each city or in networks. And I think this is a challenge of these times. And yeah, we need to recognize it to be able to work towards it.
Okay. Yeah. It's okay. Good. Okay. Well, there are so many things really interesting. Just let me say first, also Vienna learns from Barcelona. So that's really the nice thing that, because you just mentioned networks, that there are many different city networks where we try to work together, try to share the solutions we found, try to share our failures as well, because, learning is also sometimes failing, and then the next city can do it better or differently. If I think about examples in Vienna that I think worked well, is that first of all, and I think that's important because we talked a lot about privatization now, and Vienna never privatized important infrastructure, which gives us a lot of possibilities on what we do. But I just want to go back a few decades, because I already mentioned the floodings which are happening right now. And of course, every city or village near the Danube at the moment is quite concerned what's going to happen in the next few days if the rain keeps coming and if the flooding gets worse. Here in Vienna, we are kind of chilled about that. Why? Because many decades ago, we decided to invest in flooding protection, and I think everyone knows how we did it. Everybody in Vienna knows the Danube Island. That's actually, I think, one of the biggest and coolest things we ever did, because it's not only a protection against flooding, it has benefits. We didn't only do what was necessary, but we thought about how could we make it even better. And it's one of the most important recreation areas for people who live in Vienna. And you can go there, you can go swimming, you can do sports. There are fruit trees where you can just take it. There's a lot of running, dog walking, and other things. So I think that's one of the important things to always not only think about what is necessary, or in climate crisis we often talk about what we cannot have anymore, what we're going to lose, but there's so much to win if you do it smartly. And we don't always do it, but that's why I think learning from each other is so important. If someone has a great idea, share it so others can use it or adapt it somehow. And I think the Danube Island is really something that we as a city can be proud of, because it showed what was possible. Also, it cost us something. I mean, not only money, but back then the Conservative Party broke the coalition with the Social Democrats because they didn't want the Danube Island. So we don't need that. I think, yeah, it was okay to do that. I'm still sure it was the right step to take to build the whole thing. Another thing, because you talked about energy consumption at the beginning, and I think that's really important. I mean, energy poverty, of course, that's something we face in Austria as well. Just wanted to say it's not only about how much energy we consume, but also when. Looking at renewable energy, especially solar energy, it depends on when you need the energy, when you use it. It's something people have to learn and keep in mind. And we have a big solar energy project in Vienna. There's more and more solar energy because we have a lot of wind in the city. Everybody who lives here knows that. But as a city, there's not really any chances to build big windmills. So we do rely heavily to use solar energy. And of course, there's always someone who says why it's not possible. For example, we have many, many protected buildings in the city, which are beautiful and historically and architecturally very important, of course. But it's hard in time of climate crisis because you cannot touch them, and it has to be the way it is now. So one of the things that's always important, I think, is that as the city government administration, you cannot just tell others what they have to do. You also have to do it yourself. So I think it's great that a few months ago, most of you will know Vienna City Hall. And of course, it's a protected building because it's important and beautiful. But we do have solar energy panels now on the roof. Although we were told it's not possible, but of course it's possible, and you just have to look at the rules a little bit. And so you cannot see it if you stand outside of the building. That was the important part of it. But we produce our own solar energy, and I think that's a cool thing, and you have to show that you do it yourself if you expect others to do it as well. I think one more thing that I think was really important is how to involve people and how to involve groups who are not usually those who are the usual suspects or who don't have the possibilities to involve themselves. So a few years ago, we asked the children and the young people of Vienna, it was called Werkstatt Junges Wien, and within a year, 22,000 young people in Vienna participated and told us what they want, what they needed. Many of their answers were about climate and environment, of course. And what we really relied on were the cooperation partners, because where are young children and where is youth? So we worked with youth centers, for example, with kindergartens and schools. And out of all the answers we got, we made a children and youth strategy for the city, which is something that we in the city administration and in the government rely on to always think about if we plan something. And I think that's important to give them a voice, because they don't have it at the election, and usually it's just, we're going to probably make a new one soon, because it was a few years ago, and now the new children and young people, of course, and the times changes. But that's something where we learned a lot. And building on that, we did pilot projects. I know Yvonne knows about them, the climate teams, in 6 districts in the last 2 years, where we tried to engage people to give us their answers and ideas in times of climate crisis, because people, wherever they live or work or spend their time, they know what they miss, they know what they need there. Is it trees, is it benches, is it some kind of water element, might it be community cooking, whatever. And we asked them, what do you think is necessary? And there was a whole process involving the city administration with how would it be possible, what would it cost. We told them it had to be realistic to do it in 2 years. And we learned a lot. We all did. But I think the most important thing was that we learned a lot by which people can we reach. The goal was to reach people who had never participated anywhere before. I think we did quite well. We can always do better, but all the things we learned is something we take into the next projects and processes we try to do within the city. And also the city administration is learning all the time. And talking about that and sharing these experiences is something I think is really important.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I want to share you the good practices, and I agree with Michael when he explained the importance about social movements, because for us is the key, no, to do all of these projects, all of these programs. And to develop all of this, we started doing a real participatory processes, always, because yes, it's more, take its time, but it's very necessary to generate the commitment, no? The popular commitment, the collective commitment, not only the institutional commitment. Because I think so that during the design and elaboration every project, you can put in the same table, in the same space, architects, citizens, no, residents, children, these silent groups that done before participation in these processes to collaborate, no? And so the design of the street is done hand in hand, and I think so this is very important, not only to the result, because it's more democratized, no? Not only for this, it's always it's also for the because I think so the continuity of these policies depends if people defend it. And if you need that people defend it, you need involve the people at the start, when you start the processes. For example, with the project to pedestrianize the surrounding of schools, in Barcelona we started to do this project, and we have already done 200 surroundings transformation in the schools. I have seen how, for example, the families changed the way they move. Because when we started to explain the problems of the pollution, these families left the car or left the motorcycle when they knew that their children were studying in schools with pollution, and we understood the problem and the policies, And now, for example, these families are asking for more bike lanes, for more pedestrianizations, for more actions, and for them, and to be done faster, quickly, because they want to do now, immediately. I think so. This is a good practice, but difficulties, yes, many, a lot. I think so that it's important to be honest, because in all of these transformations, for example, corporate economic powers turn on the hate and fake news machine. And for example, the political parties, big mass media, and lawyers that have links with corporate economic powers make their job. By this mechanism is how they manage to spread their messages to the citizens. And for example, in my case, the pollution and tourist lobbies activate hate campaigns, personally hate campaigns, lies, fake news, lawfare strategy, in general. And for example, the former mayor of Barcelona and I have gone to the court several times because to testify against complaints of crimes, crimes that may exist due to having made the streets quicker and greener, or for having built more social housing, these crimes, And yeah, and it has been unfair and difficult, Personally, it's difficult because it's not a good option to go to the court to testify, but we won every of these processes. But the conclusion for me is, okay, politics is hard. Yes, it's hard, especially when you question the privilege of some sectors or question their power. Yes, it's hard, but you have to know what their practices are. You don't have to fear them, but you have to prepare and have strategies to not go through them alone.
That was a strong message, and I want to go with the last question, which I wouldn't dare to ask if not sent before. So this is like oversimplifying probably lots of your expertise, but if you would give one practical advice based on your research and expertise to the other cities, where to start. We are talking a lot about scale, first diagnosis, mobilizing populations. It might be also more on micro scale, but would you dare try to give this one-liner, and later we can open the floor for questions. And maybe, Michał, you haven't started yet as a first person, so let's start with you, and yeah.
Okay, so I would say use your resources wisely, because you might not have another chance. Not only in terms of, the political term, that you have a few years to realize your program, but also in terms of having access to all this material and energy abundance that we have now, which is in a huge debt to nature, and also in terms of having a relatively stable economic, political situation. And I am really frustrated when I see that cities and towns in Poland and in other countries spend huge amounts of money from European Union under the banner of climate change adaptation or climate change mitigation on projects that are relatively the projects that are kind of locking in the future that we do not want, that we cannot have. There is an expression in Poland, Polish I try to, but it doesn't work in English. But it's making it concrete in a way. So you're pouring concrete, but it stays there for decades. Whenever you build a road for cars, whenever you expand an airport, whenever you turn a plaza full of trees into a paved plaza, you're creating an unlivable future for next several decades. So, and because these things are durable, physically durable, but also you create a social reality in which people are accustomed to certain things, and they treat them as necessary, or sometimes they become necessary for them, and sometimes they become their preference, like with car dependence or flights. So yeah, just use these resources for something good, because you might not have another chance.
I assume one-liners might be more difficult for researchers, so Yvonne, would you be the second one?
Yeah, I wanted to start. Advices should be short, right? Well, I'd say never stop improving. I think it's comfortable in the comfort zone, but it can become quite risky. And that means listening carefully. I think listening is a very good approach, but also very time-consuming. You need a lot of resources. Explain transparently. That refers to any actors group here, not only politicians, but also citizens, but also scientists. And then act, and better act on evidence.
I try to explain shortly. No, but I agree with the colleagues, Michael and Yvonne, but I would like to make a call to reappropriate the concept of sustainability, no? Because I want to explain shortly, but not every sustainability policy or action is sustainable, no? I know it, but from the institutions, we need to show to people which is a good sustainability, which is the good practice, the good policy, the good action that represent the really important sustainable achievement, no? And I think so. This concept has been used for everything, no? And today it has low value. It has come a redundant idea, no? For example, no? In Spain, the spokesperson for the asphalt lobby, we are the pin wear the pin of the United Nations 2030 agenda every day on their jackets. This pin, no, of this agenda. They have no shame because they don't do nothing. And for this, I don't put this pin because don't represent me. And I want to fight against this reappropriation, no? That they do it with our concept, with our agendas, and I think so. Therefore, we must redefine, no, this concept, because I think so. Like urban planning, sustainability is not technical concept. It is a political one, no? And I think so. Before I explain, no, in this sense, on a finite planet, nothing can grow infinitely, no? And we try to explain all of this, no? And I think so that we need the build the commitment to sustainability with all groups, no? Because must be collective, no? And I think so. This is very important because I am optimist woman, and I think so now is the moment, no? Now is the time, because I trust that there is a new common sense that runs through Europe, and from each of our cities, this common sense extends and comes to life in every new bike lane built, in every car-free street, and every new social housing building. And I think so this is our legacy and the future for our children. And we need people with determination and courage to do everything.
Oh, that's hard to follow. Would have been such a great end now. But I think talking about people we need with the courage, I think the most important thing is the people, actually. Democracy and participation is so important nowadays, and so many people, it's not only about the right to vote, it's about believing that you can change something, and many people lost the belief in that. Many people do not engage with others anymore, especially not if they have a different opinion, but I think that's important. We are all different, and it's about talking with each other, talking about what we want, and understanding that maybe someone else might need and want something else, and that's okay. But let's talk about it and find a solution and make a decision together. So I think what's really important is try to engage people, to involve them. And when you're happy that you're somewhere and there are many, many people who are there and raise their voices, look who's quiet, and especially look who's missing.
But this is not the end. Now we can open the floor for the question.